For years, Iran and the United States stood on the edge of war, but never crossed the line. Iran somehow managed to avoid war with the US for over 40 years, not through force, but through leverage. The threat of escalation, regional chaos, and catastrophic costs. But something important has changed. The old rules are now gone, and the new ones are pulling us closer than ever before to a war that's been brewing for many decades. So the question isn't if it happens, it's why it hasn't until now. In this video, we'll break down Iran's mechanics of deterrence and strategic leverage, and why they may no longer be working. When it comes to conventional warfare, America is the apex predator. And it's no secret, Washington has wanted to bring down Iran ever since 1979, when the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah and shut the West out of Iran's vast oil reserves. Since then, the US has hit Iran with some of the harshest sanctions in modern history. So the question is obvious. How has one of the most isolated and outgunned countries on Earth avoided direct war with the most powerful military in history? The answer is leverage, not through strength, but through consequences. Most people are familiar with the concept of mutually assured destruction. It's the reason the US and Russia never fought directly during the Cold War, because both sides knew that any conflict would end in mutual annihilation. Now, Iran doesn't have that kind of power. It can't vaporize cities thousands of miles away, but what it can do is make war so costly, so unpredictable, that the US decides not to start one in the first place. So it isn't mutually assured destruction, it's mutually assured vulnerability. Essentially, a weaker state forcing a stronger one to act with caution, not because it fears defeat, but because it fears the price of victory. Iran's strategy to buy peace has always been quite simple. If we burn, the region burns with us. Now, of course, the US could win, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory, so painful, so destabilizing that it wouldn't be worth it. This has been Iran's strategy all along. Produce enough risk to keep enemies in check. And to accomplish that, it has maximized something known as asymmetric leverage. You see, Iran can never match America's strength, but it can focus the power it does have on pressure points, like geographical choke points, energy pipelines, vulnerable allies. This produces chaos and escalation risk. In simple terms, the US is a lion and Iran is a porcupine. One has overwhelming power, the other sharp and dangerous quills. The lion can obviously kill the porcupine, but rarely does, because the injury isn't worth the meal. Another example is Achilles, the invincible fighter. All it took was a single tendon, one weak spot, and this all-powerful hero fell. That's asymmetric leverage. You don't match strength, you target weakness. And Iran has built its strength with this strategy in mind. It can't beat the US in open war, but it can make sure that the US regrets ever trying. This asymmetric leverage is achieved through different tools, tactics, and strategies that all work together to form deterrence. Deterrence is the threat of retaliation, not to punish, but to prevent. It's how you stop your enemy from making a move by convincing them that it's just not worth the risk. In the mob classic The Sopranos, the main character Tony survives a near-death experience which leaves him physically and politically exposed. And he knows this. He suspects members of his crew are watching, waiting, wondering if he's still strong enough to defend his position as top dog. So Tony does something calculated. He picks a fight with a younger, stronger man. Not out of rage, but to send a message. I'm still dangerous. If you challenge me, you will regret it. Through this demonstration of force, Tony achieved deterrence and kept his potential enemies in check. That's the entire point of deterrence, to discourage action by instilling doubt or fear of consequences. So how does Iran establish deterrence? Well, they've developed 4 key tools: drones and missiles, the development of non-state allies, using geographical leverage, and their nuclear program. Let's start with the drones. Iran is notorious for producing some of the world's most cost-effective loitering munitions, suicide drones that are cheap, accurate, and deadly. They confuse radar, overwhelm defenses, and strike with precision. If they get through, they do damage. If they don't, they still force the enemy to waste interceptors that are 10 to 20 times times more expensive. Used correctly, they can knock out power plants, disrupt oil flow, or soften air defenses, like jabs before a haymaker. They're very easy to produce, to smuggle, to scale, and ideal for Iran's partners, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. They're so effective that Russia ordered tens of thousands of these Irani drones for their war in Ukraine. Then there are the missiles. Iran's air force is outdated, mostly modified jets from the 60s and 70s. So to compensate, they turned to rocketry, and in a single generation built one of the world's most formidable missile programs. Today, their arsenal includes ballistic and cruise missiles that fly at hypersonic speeds, dodge interceptor missiles, and strike targets thousands of kilometers away with precision. In 2024, Iran demonstrated just how powerful and dangerous this arsenal had become. After Israel attacked Iran's embassy in Damascus, they retaliated. Iran fired hundreds of drones and cruise missiles at Israel. But here's the thing, before they fired them, Iran gave everyone in the region a 3-day heads up in order to avoid an escalation into an all-out war. This gave the US and Israel time to prepare. Jordan scrambled fighter jets into the sky, US naval ships activated their air defenses, and Israel turned on every layer of air defense that they have, from the Iron Dome to David's Sling, the Arrow system, and more. And still, Iran's drones made it through and managed to strike targets all across Israel. But more importantly, they cleared the skies for more powerful cruise and ballistic missiles. These missiles pounded targets in Israel. This drone and missile attack successfully deterred Israel, but only temporarily. Months later, Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on the day of the presidential inauguration, which was a major escalation and a humiliating breach of security. And shortly after that, they assassinated Hassan Nasrallah and several other high-ranking leaders of Hezbollah in Lebanon. The strike also killed high-ranking IRGC commanders. So the message was clear. Israel was no longer deterred, so Iran needed to retaliate for a second time to re-establish deterrence. So on October 1st, Iran fired back. This time, instead of a 3-day heads up, they only provided a 3-hour notice, and they used more powerful ballistic missiles, and the result was devastating. Iran's missiles sliced through Israel's multi-billion-dollar defense network. The THAAD system, PAC-2, Iron Dome, David's Sling, all of it was overwhelmed. Dozens of missiles struck the Nevatim Air Base, which is home to Israel's prized F-35 fighter jets, which was a huge deal because a base like this is protected by the world's very best air defenses. Despite the presence of these sophisticated systems, Iran's missiles got through anyway.
المطار دخل المطار المطار دخل يا ولاد لا المطار المطار دخل لا المطار ده نعم تحرك 200 المطار يا رب الله.
It was a powerful display of capabilities, and it shocked the world. Now, you might not believe me about the impact of this strike because of a media blackout that didn't really show the damage. So I want you to take a look at these videos from that night.
Wow.
شومير واو 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 واو
Now, these drones and missiles are impressive, but they can't destroy the US or Israeli militaries. But that isn't the point. They exist to inflict pain, to raise the cost of war so high that no one wants to pay it. What Iran demonstrated through the existence of their drone and missile programs and their strikes on Israel is an ability to inflict serious damage. And Iran has been providing these powerful weapons out to anyone willing to strike its enemies in the region. Which brings us to Iran's second most important deterrent, the axis of resistance. chokepoints. Isolated since 1979, Iran lacks state allies, especially in the Middle East. So it helped to develop its own allies by organizing a regional network of armed political groups with shared interests and goals. At least 14 organizations in 6 different countries with a collective fighting force of over 300,000 troops, funded, armed, trained. The 2 most important groups are Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. Hezbollah was born out of resistance to Israel's occupation of Lebanon during the 80s and 90s. Iran helped grow them into a powerful threat directly on Israel's border, armed with hundreds of thousands of rockets. As we've witnessed over the last year, Hezbollah has been able to inflict serious damage onto Israel. After October 7th, Hezbollah's operations forced 150,000 Israelis to relocate to southern cities, which produced tremendous strain on the economy. And their rockets triggered the Iron Dome defense system thousands of times, costing Israel billions of dollars in defense spending. Israel also suffered over 1,000 casualties in their invasion into southern Lebanon and lost over 50 Merkava tanks. Now, Hezbollah eventually did agree to a ceasefire out of exhaustion, and they are no doubt degraded, but they aren't defeated. So if a larger war ever did break out, it wouldn't just be Iran firing missiles at Israel, it would be Hezbollah as well. For this reason, Israel has had to strongly consider Hezbollah in any discussion of war with Iran. And in Yemen, the Houthis, which started out as a youth group, eventually grew into a fighting force capable of overthrowing the government. Now, they sit on the Red Sea, threatening global shipping routes. In the last year, they've rerouted shipping, costing the global economy billions of dollars. They cut the Suez Canal revenue by $6 billion a year and bankrupt Israel's southern port city of Eilat. The US, despite bombing the Houthis relentlessly, haven't been able to stop them. So Iran's goal has been simple and effective: surround US allies in the region with serious firepower that can disrupt their economies and threaten security. This is essentially deterrence by entanglement. If you hit Iran, their allies will strike you in different parts of the region. The third part of Iran's deterrence is leveraging their geography. Iran is difficult to invade because it is shielded by vast mountain ranges. But more importantly, it sits on the eastern edge of the Gulf. 30% of the world's oil flows through this Gulf, out of Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. And every drop gets funneled through a single narrow choke point, known as the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's drones, missiles, and naval mines focused on this choke point could shut down the entire Gulf within hours. If they did this, the global economy would crash. Experts estimate that just a 30-day shutdown would send gas prices to $11 a gallon, triggering a worldwide recession. And if war breaks out, Iran won't just fire at ships in this choke point. They'll hit the oil fields, the refineries, the pipelines, the ports. They'll cripple the entire system, even if it costs them everything. That's how they turn geography into leverage. They don't need an equally powerful navy because they have proximity from the coast and the ability to inflict damage. Finally, Iran also uses their nuclear program as a form of deterrent. Despite decades of fear-mongering, Iran is not really racing towards a bomb. US intelligence confirms this. And even if Iran did try to make a bomb, they only have enough uranium for 5 or so weapons. That's not really enough to win a war, especially not with the United States. And if they ever used one, the US or Israel would launch a second strike that would wipe them out. So these weapons can be a useful defensive deterrent, but they aren't feasible to ever actually be used. And they aren't necessary because their missiles and the axis of resistance allies are destructive enough. But the potential for Iran to obtain a bomb is still a useful deterrent. You see, Iran uses the idea of a bomb to create fear, to generate pressure, to force the West to respect their capabilities. So whenever tensions rise, Iran can simply ramp up the enrichment of uranium, demonstrating that if push comes to shove, they could develop a nuclear bomb. This potential is what led to the 2015 nuclear deal with Obama, which was essentially a trade, where Iran reduced their enrichment and welcomed international inspectors in exchange for sanctions relief to boost their struggling economy. It was a win-win for both sides, and proof that the program itself was a bargaining chip that could deter their enemies and secure peace. So what does all of this amount to? A strategy designed not to overpower their enemies, but to cost them dearly. So should the US ever attack Iran, the response would be to burn the oil fields in the region, shut the Strait of Hormuz, block the Red Sea, crash the global economy, and rain down missiles at the bases, ports, and cities of vulnerable regional allies. And of course, threaten a potential nuclear breakout. Now, of course, if any of this took place, it would mean it was an all-out war for survival, and Iran would destroy itself in the process and likely wouldn't survive. But they would make sure that in the process, the US extends itself and bleeds significantly. And in a world where Washington is already stretched thin, trying to contain China and confront Russia, this is potentially enough to deter any aggression. But even with all these different capabilities, things seem to have changed. The US has still decided to take a more aggressive tone, with many believing that war is on the horizon, for real this time. And there's a simple explanation for why. You see, deterrence works until it doesn't. And there are a number of reasons why Iran's deterrence is starting to fail. First, and most critically, the axis of resistance, aka Iran's regional allies, are vulnerable. Hezbollah has been severely degraded. They still pose a threat, but their decision to accept a ceasefire with Israel speaks volumes about their fragile position. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. Israel assassinated Hezbollah's leadership, shattered their communications with the targeted pager attacks, leveled their rocket platforms in the south, and killed thousands of people, including civilians. Trapped between Sunni and Christian political forces in the north and the IDF in the south, Hezbollah knew a prolonged war could destroy their position in Lebanon permanently. So they accepted the ceasefire in order to live to fight another day, with the assumption that their supply lines through Syria would remain open and rebuild their strength. But just 12 days after accepting the ceasefire, their Syrian ally, Bashar al-Assad, fell after a blitzkrieg offensive. With Assad gone, the important land bridge from Iran to Lebanon was severed, meaning Hezbollah is now wounded, bleeding, and cut off from resupply. Israel now occupies southern Lebanon and will likely hold that position in the event of a war with Iran to ensure that Hezbollah is less effective. So a key deterrent in Iran's playbook is now in tatters. Next door in Iraq, several pro-Iran militias were absorbed into the Iraqi army, which was a move that reduced Tehran's direct influence on those fighters. And in Yemen, the Houthis are under constant bombardment by US airstrikes. And in Gaza, Hamas has essentially been reduced to a scattered hit-and-run guerrilla force, and it's unclear if they'll even survive. So the axis of resistance, which is a pillar of Iran's deterrence strategy, is crumbling, and with it, so is Iran's ability to project pain. Another weakness is Iran's economy. Years of sanctions have choked Iran. In 2012, their GDP was $644 billion. By 2023, it had collapsed to $370 billion. That's nearly a 50% drop. The impact on society has been severe. Inflation, skyrocketing energy costs, collapsing pension funds, and mounting unrest. This pressure on society has produced several destabilizing protests. In 2019, 1,500 protesters were reportedly killed by security forces. And in 2022, the death of a young woman in Iran in police custody triggered the largest uprising since the revolution in 1979. This internal pressure has fractured Iran's leadership. There are now factions that view economic survival as a higher priority than retaliation and deterrence. They want to de-escalate tensions, re-engage with the West, and end the sanctions. Masoud Pezeshkian recently won the presidency on that platform. As a moderate, he promised to reopen negotiations and stabilize the economy. But that shift created internal friction and hesitation during a time when Iran needed to be unified in confronting challenges to their security. In 2024, when Israel escalated by bombing their embassy in Syria and assassinating their allies, Iran hesitated to respond because of this debate. The US and Israel interpreted this hesitation as weakness. It validated their suspicions that the pressure campaign of sanctions and escalating attacks on their regional allies was working. Washington saw the growing protests, the economic collapse, the fractured leadership, and drew a conclusion. Iran isn't willing to fight. They aren't able to deter us from escalating. You see, deterrence only works if your enemy believes you'll follow through. If they think you're bluffing, the game is over. And that is what has changed the calculus. The US and Israel now believe Iran is weaker than ever, militarily, economically, and politically. And they have very good reason to believe that they can exploit this weakness. Because no one expected Bashar al-Assad to collapse in Syria in just 10 days. But in hindsight, all the conditions were there. So they believe, whether they're correct or not, that Iran could fall too if they were to just escalate their pressure. That's why the Trump administration has escalated a full spectrum assault. In my last video, I explored the US plan to escalate sanctions, cyber attacks, covert operations, assassinations, and maybe even use a nuclear weapon against Iran to produce unrest. And the US is willing to do this because they no longer expect Iran to strike back. After the US assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Iran retaliated with a symbolic missile strike on an empty base. After Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh and Hassan Nasrallah and IRGC commanders, Iran struck back, but they didn't produce any casualties. The strikes were impressive, but performative. So both the US and Israel have noticed a pattern of performative strikes in response to very destabilizing and escalatory attacks on Iran. This lends itself to the idea that Iran is afraid, which motivates the US and Israel to escalate even further. Weakness invites increased aggression. In conclusion, for decades, Iran didn't need to win a war in order to secure peace. They just needed to make war too dangerous to start. That was the logic behind its deterrence strategy. Their missiles, militias, choke points, chaos. A doctrine built not on strength, but on producing consequences. But deterrence only works if the other side believes in the consequences and your willingness to produce them. The problem now is that Washington no longer believes this. The US sees a weakened Iran, a fractured alliance, an economy in freefall, a leadership hesitating under pressure. And with that, the rules have changed. This is why Trump is being so aggressive, and it's why war with Iran is more likely than ever before. Iran, therefore, stands at a crossroads. They either submit to the pressure or they rise to the occasion. It's a game of chicken, and so far it seems that the supreme leader of Iran is willing to play it. Over the last few months, he has been trying to course correct his nation's position, warning that Iran is actually willing and capable to inflict damage in retaliation.
They threaten to attack us, which we don't think is very probable, but if they commit any mischief, they will surely receive a strong reciprocal blow. If they are thinking of causing sedition inside the country as in past years, the Iranian people themselves will deal with them. Same as before.
His message wasn't just for Trump, it was for his own people, a rallying cry to unite Iran's fractured political factions to meet the coming US pressure with strength. But his words may no longer be enough, as the United States clearly believes that the cost of war with Iran has dropped. If Iran doesn't deter the United States from this path, they might have to make good on producing those consequences, which could be catastrophic for all of us. So what do you think? Is this war inevitable? Can Iran regain deterrence? Is there something you think I need to consider? Let me know in the comment section below. And before you go, remember to subscribe to this channel for more geopolitical deep dives and propaganda debunking. If you like what I do, you can support my work at propandco.com, where you can become a paid member and gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, explainer videos, and podcasts with your favorite guests. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.
Trust nothing. No lies.